All right. Well, welcome you guys to our hospice panel this morning, Dispelling the Myths of Hospice. I'm so excited because we are being joined with four amazing individuals who all come from a different background and perspective, and you are going to just really enjoy your time with them this morning. When we thought about how we wanted to do this and what kinds of breakout sessions we wanted to have, hospice comes up because it can be a scary thing. And we hear that word and we just kind of put it to the back of our minds like this big, scary H word. And these individuals want to talk with you this morning about how it can maybe not be that scary, really abstract thing that no one really wants to talk about. They're here to kind of bring a little bit of education. They are going to get a chance to introduce themselves, so they'll give you their background and where they come from. And then we will just enjoy listening to them and their perspectives this morning as they share with us. So first, I'm going to go around the screen just as you guys kind of are on my screen. So John, do you mind starting us off and just introducing us?
Sure. I'm John Reeby. I'm a chaplain, currently a chaplain with Homestead Hospice in Rock Hill. And I have been a hospice chaplain for about 5 years. I've been an Anglican pastor for over 25. And so I've been in the pastoral business pretty much all my adult life. Just want to say that really for those people who are facing hospice care, hopefully I'll say a little bit more about this in a bit, but just that there is all reason to have hope. And my mother went through hospice care. I cannot imagine. She passed a little bit over a year ago, and I can't imagine going through that process without the hospice experience. So, with that, back to you, Heidi.
All right, Sarah.
Yes. I'm Sarah Anderson. I am a child life specialist that works specifically with children, and my focus is really on helping children adjust to new situations, providing education, preparation, and support. And I often do that in the context of end-of-life settings. I work in a pediatric intensive care unit in a hospital that is a children's center within a large community hospital. So I often have opportunities to work with families around the death of a child. But in this case, our focus today is going to be on working with children, preparing them. And there is so much power in educating and preparing children for what's happening next. And that's really going to be my focus in our panel today.
Great. Thank you. Michael.
Yeah, I'm Michael Barnett. I'm a med peds physician. So I do internal medicine and pediatrics and now all hospice and palliative care. So I'm here at the University of Alabama in Birmingham and Children's of Alabama. So I split my time between the adult world and the kids world. So literally taking care of neonates all the way to our oldest adults and help follow our patients. And this is similar to many places around the country, particularly on the pediatric side. But we follow our own patients as they go home with hospice. So we stay involved with the patients that have come through our university and have been part of our team, taking care of them in the hospital or in our clinics. We continue to follow with those patients. So that helps have that continuity. When folks go home, they don't feel like they're, losing that connection to the people who knew them best and who took care of them for months, sometimes years, leading up to that. My particular interest, the thing that I do academically is teach communication skills. So I'm very passionate about words matter, and how we talk about things and how we talk to our families and to our kids, that we can be really thoughtful and mindful about the words that we use. And like John said, like, how do we maintain hope, and how do we honor the things that matter most to our families? And like John said, I mean, this is something that I've experienced as well personally, and having my grandfather on hospice, and experiencing the opposite too, of losing my dad in an ICU. And so I can see kind of both sides, right, and bring that to the table. So thank you so much for letting me be here with you.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. And then finally, Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Fenimore. I'm a nurse practitioner in hospice and palliative care in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I started my nursing career briefly in the ICU. Was there about 6 to 9 months, but I thought, wow, the communication between what the doctors are telling the families in the room and what they're saying in the hall, there's a big gap there that needs to be bridged. And so that began my path on hospice and palliative care. Right now, I'm actually doing community-based palliative care, and I think palliative care is a new buzzword that probably people have heard of. And so maybe later in our talk, I can expand on what the difference is between hospice and palliative care. They definitely overlap. So I'd like to maybe explore that. And I do want to say, for Inheritance of Hope, we definitely had one of our dear friends. That's how I became acquainted with you all, is one of our dear friends went through your program, and he has passed away this past summer. But we're dear friends with their family and their teenage kids. So thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, we're so glad you're all here. And I really think that you all bring such a unique perspective, and just with your personal stories, with your medical background, with your spiritual support. I think that is exactly what our families this morning are hoping to kind of gain and gather from your expertise. So I think actually, Michelle, you could probably just start us off. My first question would just be like, what is hospice? So maybe you could even just start right there.
Maybe I'll even start with what is palliative care, because palliative care is actually a big umbrella. Palliative care is focusing on comfort care. How can we work with your symptoms? And what we mean by that is, when you're going through something, say like cancer, you're probably seeing a cancer doctor who's going to focus on that cancer, or maybe you're seeing a heart doctor and they focus on that heart. With palliative, we're really trying to look at the whole person. And we actually go into the homes, and we see a lot of times there might be a breakdown with, like, maybe the patient isn't sleeping, or maybe there's a lot of anxiety going on, or so palliative care is focusing on the symptoms. Some of the difference between palliative and hospice care is hospice also focuses on the symptoms, but when you are ready to, if or when you decide to choose hospice, that is when you stop aggressive treatment. And what I mean by that is, you might stop getting chemotherapy, you might stop going to your heart doctors or your kidney doctors. It's when you've made the decision to stop aggressive medication and only do symptom management. Where palliative care, you can continue to see your specialist. With hospice, you do get just a team approach, and with palliative care as well, you do get the wonderful addition of chaplain support, social work, nurses, doctors. So it is a team approach to, again, look at the whole person and the whole family, which, as often includes children, but it's whoever the patient says is their loved ones.
Great. And typically in a home setting, correct? So hospice is usually in the home, sometimes inpatient. What would be the benefit, I guess, or the difference between being in home versus inpatient, and what is that?
Well, if you think about it, and this is what a lot of palliative care does, in addition to working with symptoms, we start to really try to talk through, what are your goals of care? And even when I was learning nursing, that even made me roll my eyes. So I'm sure some of you are rolling your eyes when I say, what are your goals of care? Because you think, well, my goals are to get better. But, when we start to break it down, our medical system is so complex. And so when you think of any treatment, there's good and bad that comes from it. So when we think, oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought. So what was your question? I went on a tangent.
It's okay. We were talking about like inpatient versus in home.
Right. And so it's really important to say, to if you're saying, hey, my focus is to be comfortable, or my focus is to be pain-free, what we work with patients is if this is your goal, it's time to communicate that to both your family and the physicians. Because a lot of physicians think, hey, you're showing up to my office, that means you automatically want aggressive care. Not all physicians think that, but some physicians, just assume you're in their office. Okay, well, they're just going to go forward where, you're sitting there in their hands. But if it's okay for you to start thinking through what your goals are and then communicating that to your doctors.
Anything to add? Anyone else?
I would just like to say that, for those folks who are looking and facing the idea of hospice care, and one of the things that I emphasize to my folks is that being on hospice care is not a death sentence. Mm-hmm. Now, you have to have one to qualify, but the reality is life is always in the Lord's hands. And amazing things can happen. And what hospice is, again, it's ceasing to stop that aggressive treatment, okay, and looking at your goal. And the reality is, this is the most important journey that all of us will take in our lives. And the question is, how do you want this to go? How can we help? And what are your goals for saying goodbye to your family, saying goodbye to your loved ones? I know that in my life, my goal is no pain, and that can be a goal. I think that if we would ask people and ask them about the end of life, probably most of us would say, I want to go in my sleep. And that's one of the things that hospice is here to help happen for you in God's time. Mm. And like I say, life is always in the Lord's hands, and people typically live longer on hospice care than without it. That is a statistical fact. And when we look at this idea of hospice, I have known people, including in my own relatives. I had an aunt who was on hospice care for 10 years, and she of course always had to requalify and meet the things, but she had Alzheimer's dementia. As we say, that's the long goodbye. And again, my uncle and my cousins were again, they couldn't imagine going through that process without the hospice care. Yeah. And there are people who come off hospice.
Totally.
And they, I've had people who've recovered. Well, they know where to go when the time comes again.
Yeah. And I think that brings me to maybe this next portion is, there's a lot of preconceived notions that we have about hospice. And I think you guys, you touched on it, John. It's does it mean I'm dying? Does it mean that I have now given up? What are some of the things that you guys have seen? Michael, maybe we could start with you of just walking someone through that does it mean I am going to die for sure?
Right. That's a great, yeah. I think John said it well, right? Like only the Lord knows for sure. And I think that we have to approach this with great humility that we may know a lot, medicine knows a lot,
right,
but we don't know everything. And so approaching that with this sort of sense of uncertainty, and yet, to qualify for hospice, sort of by definition means that two clinicians have agreed that
right,
we think we may be looking at 6 months or less.
right,
That's a very big window. And the reality is that most patients that go on to hospice in this country actually go on with only few days left to life. We wait so long until we bring in hospice. And so we miss out on all of those benefits. But when you think about living 6 months and potentially requalifying, like John said, and beyond that initial 6 months, that's actually a pretty big window. And so it is not just for those who are what we may say actively dying or impending death. They are in their last few hours or days. That it's really about how do we make the most of the time that we have left and live it up and
Absolutely.
maximize quality and do all the things that we want to do as a family. And the second thing you asked was sort of this idea about giving up. And I think this is a really important distinction, because up to this point, and Michelle kind of talked about this, that so much up to this, all we focused on is the next treatment. It has been, the next curative treatment, and the focus has always been on treatment. And so it's no wonder then that when we start talking about stopping treatment, when we make the focus the treatment and not this thing she said, goals of care, or what's most important, or the things that we value as a family, if we're focusing on treatment and then suddenly that treatment stops, that sure does feel like giving up. And instead, what we're really talking about is shifting to the things that are helping. So the reality is, when we stop aggressive treatment, it's because it's not helping anymore. And potentially what it's doing is it's hurting. And so we get to a place where we say, you know what, this is what we had been doing before, and this is now either no longer doing what we hoped it would do, or it's actually causing harm. And so now let's shift to different kinds of treatments that focus on your pain and your breathing and your sleep and your anxiety, right? And so suddenly, if we can shift that language, it's not about giving up at all. It's about focusing on the things that matter most and maximizing quality for the time that the Lord gives us.
Yeah, that's so good. Anything to add before we move on?
I would just like to expand on what the other speakers are talking about. But I think for all of us, when we focus on end of life, we would all hope for a natural death. But in the circumstances we're discussing today, we're acknowledging that terminal illness is not a natural death. It's not after the end of a life that's been lived and has, taken families through generations, and now it's, the elderly and that's a natural part of life. But terminal illness is really an unnatural part of life. But in that unnatural circumstances, we can still create beauty. And in our profession, there's something what we consider a beautiful death, which is often this opportunity for us to come around a family and help them find those ways to make those moments most meaningful. And if hospice does, lean towards impending death, what can we do for a family? How are we going to support the grieving while they are in this waiting period and in this time of memory making? And a lot of times you want a community of support of people who are not related to you, helping you discover what that might look like and how to create that for you.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that is what's scary. Like, how do I ask for help? How do I take this news to my people? I love what you guys were saying about kind of switching the narrative, right? From I'm giving up to I have different goals now. I love that. I'm sure there's families right now who are nodding along at home thinking, yes, that's what I want. I want a different goal. I don't like that feeling of I'm stopping treatment and thus I'm giving up. But a couple of you have touched on like intentional living and memory making and things like that. So I'd love to just expand on that a little bit. Like, what does that look like when you are deciding that you're going to now enter hospice care? What are some practical things that you've seen families do in terms of intentional living? That is what we are all about at IoH, and memory making. Both of those things are near and dear to our hearts, and I know that they're near to our families' hearts. So what are some practical things that you guys have seen take place? Aside from coming on a legacy retreat.
There's this concept of a bucket list of things people would like to accomplish during their lifetime. Mm-hmm. And often that list might be made as a family, and, it might be creative. The beach might have to come to your house instead of the family going to the beach. So there's definitely ways to check off those big plans on a bucket list, or those things that families would like to experience together, and just creating maybe a timeline or specific things that families want to do together as a family, and then finding creative ways to do that.
Mm-hmm. Say too, for especially families with kids, is to let some happy moments are okay. I think sometimes people feel like we've got to feel this certain way. I was with a man who had a teenage son, and his mom was dying, and the man was so upset that the boy just wanted to play video games. And I'm like, but he is a kid, and it's okay. He's gonna grieve his mother, but it's okay to be a kid too. And it's okay to enjoy some moments, because I think we sometimes feel like we have to grieve. Or also just telling your friends maybe some words, that I need to talk about my fears or my loved one dying, without you saying, no. I mean, we need to allow people to say that. And we need to allow them to change the subject and talk about nothing, or talk about, something that seems trivial.
Right.
To know that those things are all good and okay and healthy, especially for kids, and to let kids be kids, and because they're going to grieve, but they need to enjoy things too.
I really think children can teach us so much in that model of being loss-oriented in grief, and then going back to playing and going back and forth, because I think there's a lot of grief work happening in that behavior, and that we as adults, we often feel guilty while we're grieving. We might laugh about something, or, find a little bit of joy, and then that can feel guilty because, like you were saying, we're supposed to be sad. But I think that children can teach us that is a very active way of grieving, is going in and out of grieving moments. And, the more you're in those emotions that children are, where they're able to distract themselves with something, and that's, it can be a healthy way to go back and forth. And adults, we can really learn that from children.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the helpful things is that, for the person who's on hospice care, to recognize that their life is not, it's not yet over. Okay. And like I say, it's not the death sentence. I mean, for example, I had a patient once who was, he was elderly, and he had been a professional pilot, and he could no longer get up, and he was bedbound, and every time I went to talk to him, and there was this sense of pining for that life again. And so what we were able to do is we were able to arrange to have some friends come over. We brought him out to his big backyard, and they taught him to fly a remote control airplane with a camera on it. and recorded it. And, you know, his life in that moment was just wonderful. And so, you know, there are these things that we can do to help the families be creative. Mm-hmm. And I love the idea of bringing the beach to the house. You know, you put on the waves, music on the loudspeakers, and turn on all the lights and throw on sunscreen, and and that kind of thing. These are the kinds of things that do create the memories that will last, and they become the touchstones for when they go through bereavement, that they can come back to those memories and be grounded on.
To continue on that, I think this, working with kids as well, that kids are going to grieve differently, sort of where they are developmentally and their age. And I think sometimes we struggle as families, exactly these stories that, well, they're not grieving the way I expect that they should, or maybe they don't even really understand fully everything that's going on right now and all the implications. And I've seen some families do some really neat things in creating legacy that continues for years. Thinking about recording messages or writing letters for all the milestones that they will miss, for prom and weddings and all those things that are yet to come. And so I'm a big believer in words and sort of finding ways to say the things that matter. And so some may have heard of the book, The Four Things Matter Most. And I think that's a great sort of framework of thinking about, these 4 phrases that really mean so much to our relationships of please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you. And thinking about creative ways to say those things as we sort of do our life review and come to terms with this loss that's coming.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's so good. I think what I kind of pulled from too is hearing that, John, I appreciated what you said about having these like touch points to come back to, as like, remember when we did this, and everyone's faces, I could picture like lighting up like, yes, I remember when we went on that virtual field trip to the tide pools, because that's where our person wanted to go. And I love that, is having that as also kind of like an anchor point of being able to be, as you're intentional about these things, you have something of an anchor to come kind of like ground yourself in, of those like moments of just intentional living, even in the end. And so that's so good. I'm wondering if, we've kind of touched on this briefly, but I'm wondering if you can kind of give like a bigger overview of, we've talked about like hospices for the whole family. So what does that entail? Like, who gets services? What do those services look like? Like, is it really for children too? What, in an ideal world, how can our families be advocating for services for the entire family?
Don't everybody jump in at once.
Or is that a myth? Is it not?
Go ahead. Heidi, you're just going to have to call names and say who you want to start. So I think
absolutely.
Okay, go, Michelle.
I think some of it is asking for, and even if you don't know the words of what you're asking for, is saying yes to getting information. And I was going to say, even with, I wanted to thank your families for even tuning in, because for years I've met with families. I'm one of the first people you might meet when you hear the word palliative or hospice. Mm-hmm. And unless they introduce me that way, I don't ever walk in and say, I'm a hospice nurse, or I'm a hospice nurse practitioner, because usually the curtains come down and they really don't hear much of what I say next. Mm-hmm. But instead, if I walk in and say, let me tell you about some services that can come to your home. So again, I just want to say thank you for even listening to us talk today. So, in what you're doing, whether you may never pick hospice for your family, but to learn what the services are is just say yes when they say, hey, do you want to learn about this? I think it's a good thing because, like I say, how can you say no when you don't even know what it is and what it entails? So the important thing about, yes, hospice is a team approach, and I'll let some of the others talk about it, but it is a team approach. I mean, obviously the patient is the star performer, as we say, or, but it is there for support for the family. But some of it is just you learning to say yes when anyone asks if you want information about. So that way you can hear more. So I'll let you all take it next.
Well, I think it's helpful for, just to clarify, right, that like who's on that team, right? Because it's so different really than most other places in healthcare that by definition, when you get hospice, that you have a nurse and a doctor and a social worker and a chaplain and aides, other people that can come and help with sort of practical daily things. I've had, and so everybody, I think we've got representatives of a lot of that here. And I think that's helpful to be able to speak to like what our roles are. But I know, I've had patients who, were home with hospice where aides would come to help them do practical things like baths and the things that we worried about and just physical care things, to have a social worker helping to process this and to help provide counseling and to provide resources for how do I talk to my kids about this and books and things like that. So most definitely it is for everyone. And I think what I've seen with hospice is that if we don't know, or if we're not sure what to do or what to say, we go out and ask, and we bring in the right resources and talk to child life specialists and other people to help us know how better to care for this family.
Right. One of the things about being a chaplain is, when you come onto hospice care, there are things that come with that. The nurse comes with that. The aides come with that, and you've got a social worker available. I've had plenty of folks who have very strong faith community support, and they decline the hospice chaplain, and that's fine. And the one of the things that we help to do is to draw upon whatever resources, and including spiritual resources, to help you make that final journey. And yet, the chaplain is there. Plenty of other folks will say, we've got a great church, we've got a great pastor, but all the prayer, the better. And we want you and to come and be, and the purpose of the spiritual dimension, okay, is not to come into and to foster any particular faith tradition. It's all about you. What questions do you have? The other thing is that the chaplain's benefit is that we're not only here for the patient. We're here for the staff too, because you guys go through all kinds of heart-wrenching stuff, and you may need somebody to talk to. Well, we're supposed to be here for you as well. And so, even in those cases where we have families who have declined spiritual care, they may, at a moment, they may say, I'm wondering about what the afterlife's going to be. What it's going to be like. And then the staff can say, well, we have a person on our staff who deals with those things. Would you like him or her to come and talk to you? I mean, that's what we're here for, is to be a resource, and for the families to know that they have these resources together. Mm-hmm. When my mom went through hospice, there was stuff that was just beyond the capability of my father to be able to handle. Mm-hmm. And that's what hospice was there to be able to help support him and help him make those decisions and do that care. I mean, that's what I see is we're the helpers that are available and coming in.
Yeah, I think that kind of lends me to my next thought, which is, what are the positive things? We've touched on it briefly, but I'd love to kind of spend some time talking through really just like the really positive things about hospice, because I've been working with our families for so long that I know and see their sweet posts, and I'll get those phone calls that say, God bless those hospice people. Like, they are just the best, or we had the sweetest hospice nurse. And it really is interesting, the beauty that families are reflecting upon in the last several days with their parent or with their spouse, when they're thinking like, I don't think I could have done this without those hospice people. So in your opinion, and your, like, what you guys are seeing, like, what is it that ushers in that really positive kind of like feeling towards those last days, but even all up until, like, let's say, I think, Michael, you said, usually it's the last few days. People are kind of waiting to make that transition to hospice the last few days. And Michelle, you're talking about goals of care longer term. So what are some positives of starting hospice, maybe in a while back, and then what are some positive things that you guys have seen kind of come out of your patients, or just stories that you can recollect? This is where I have to call on someone again.
Yeah.
Well, I can say from the medical perspective, one of the things that I talk to families about, because often our experience, right, our healthcare systems are fragmented, and there's a lot of sort of back and forth from hospitals and clinics, and especially when you have a serious illness, you've got lots of different providers, and it's oftentimes it's just overwhelming. And I think one of the greatest thing about hospice is that you now have a point person. You have this person, this nurse that is sort of like your quarterback. You have this person now that you can call, and they give you a phone number that you can literally call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there are very few places in medicine that provide that kind of care. And, for most of us, right, we call and we leave a message on a line, and then someone 3 days later responds to us. And to have that sort of accessibility to say, hey, look, something's not right, or we're not sure what to do, and either have them walk me through on the phone what to do, or actually send someone out to the house, even in the middle of the night. That kind of, access, and there's something so comforting to know that I am not doing this alone.
Yeah.
And that the longer you have that, that's why you see these families that feel like their hospice team is now a part of their family, because they have walked this with them, sometimes for weeks, for months, for longer. But I think that 24/7 access, particularly kind of from my medical perspective, is one of the most helpful things.
So good.
I think another piece is, as professionals, we provide the environment and the opportunity to have difficult conversations with individuals that they might not have been able to have with anyone else. A lot of times the community wants to focus on healing. And when you get to a place where your healing is going to look very different, and you're entering to a place where you know that death is imminent, you want to be able to talk about something that makes other people uncomfortable. And when you're able to share that with a professional, they're going to have the way to start that conversation in order for family members to talk about what's meaningful and most important to them. And Michael also mentioned working with the children during that time. I think it's a great time to start dialoguing about preparing children, whether it's the 3 days or it's the 6 months or it's a year, helping them really understand what's happening. And children at different ages and stages need different things, but oftentimes the concept of death is a new construct that we have to help build their knowledge around. And that comes with being comfortable talking about death, being comfortable talking about what the body looks like as it starts to slow down, and really being able to have those difficult conversations with people who are able to really talk about and counsel with individuals and family members about that type of thing.
Yeah, for so many people, I think the thought of, again, doing hospice, it's this huge anxiety, but once people do agree to talk to us, it's like a weight has been lifted. And I think all of us have seen that with patients and families, like they don't want to talk, but once you can they realize we're not scary and we're just here to tell you what to expect. I mean, and that really does lessen stress. And I think like what Sarah was just saying, all of us in the field are comfortable talking about this, and we think, and most of us can help, you guys, the patients and families, also get comfortable with it. I equate this a lot to talking with your children about sex. You're like, oh, it's so awkward, but and it shouldn't just be one conversation. It shouldn't just be the talk. As your children ages, you need to be talking about different things. Well, the same with death and dying. I think it's at first, is it just this one conversation? But I mean, it really should be a open conversation that comes up many times and in many different ways and circumstances, and of course, depending on the ages as well. But and as far as chaplains, I've struggled with some of the churches, or not struggle, but I do feel like a lot of churches pray for healing. And so I think that when our families feel like, healing, again, I'm not going to be able to heal, they feel like they're not getting truth or able to talk truth with, and so this is what the hospice team brings to you, is instead of saying, well, let's pray for healing. And it's like, I know that's not going to happen. And that's not talking to me.
Well, okay. I'm going to talk as a theologian for a moment. Okay. And that the reality is, when we, first of all, as healers, we should all be praying for healing. And death is the ultimate healing. And we need to have that. We need to have that perspective. But when we pray for healing, we know that our loving God does in fact answer those prayers absolutely every time, because he heals, or, God heals in body, mind, spirit, and soul, as God chooses. Okay. And when we're talking about healing of the body is the only one that's visible. So there is, when we pray for healing, there may be a soul healing. There may be a mind healing. There may be a spiritual healing that is going on. And so when we are praying for relationships with the family, and saying goodbye and building those relationships, that is absolutely a spiritual healing. Okay, we got to stop thinking about healing only in healing the disease, and really, my biggest thing is that the decision for hospice really means that we are making a decision that we are here to help you. Now, if the thought of praying for healing is we've got to change the conversation there, because life is always in the Lord's hands. But really, ultimately, when we're talking about hospice being the service to help people die with dignity and hope, and to help the family, get through this, and for them to know that we're still there for them even afterwards, because we do have a bereavement program. We are a resource for them. So, in the sense, you're right that so much of our culture, when they think of healing, they think of getting better from the disease. We have to understand that healing is so much more dimensional than just the body. It's the mind, it's the spirit, it's the soul.
Yeah. I love that. I love that there's different approaches to it. And that's what I love about this panel, is that everyone's kind of pulling from their own viewpoints. And
Right.
I love that everyone is kind of bringing in this extra little bit, saying like, you're saying healing's not maybe just the body. And I hear like Michelle saying like, oh man, like when my patients say like, my church back home is saying, we're praying for healing. And then I come to a hospice chaplain and they're saying, I'm praying for healing, even though that might look different. It's getting
Right.
that entire approach instead of just a one focus.
Right. Right.
And so, yeah, I see that as definitely another positive. We touched on a little bit the kids, and I want to circle back to that, because is it a positive thing? This is what I'm gathering you guys are saying. And obviously at Inheritance of Hope, we educate our kids. That's one of the things that many of our families have had to do before they even come on a retreat, is they have to have those hard conversations with their kids, and giving them some tools to kind of start those conversations. Then they get home and maybe they've transitioned to hospice, and we've started to have those conversations and they seem really scary. So I think you've touched on, like, you have social workers that can kind of help prepare your kiddos. You might call in a child life specialist. But I think our families would want to know, like, when do we tell our kids, and how do we explain that, mom's not going to get better or dad's not going to get better? Like, how do we actually say those words? Sarah, this might be your time to shine, but how do you approach that conversation? And what do you say?
Sure. I think we begin with acknowledging that parents are the experts in their children.
Mm-hmm.
They are experts in how they explore their world, take in new information, how they cope with things, how they present their emotions, how they express anger. Parents are the experts in their children. And knowing what you know about your child, understanding how they explore their world, you can come up with how to best talk to them. It is not easy. They're very difficult conversations, but it's very necessary for families to come together and be honest with each other, because the honesty promotes the trusting relationship. You want your children to know that you're talking honestly and giving them enough information to help them understand. What's very important to address is the self-blame, because as individuals, it's human nature to try and blame. Children do the same thing, but they turn it on themselves. What did I do wrong? How did I cause this? Why am I being punished? Very, very important for them to understand this is nothing that they could have caused. This is nothing that they need to be responsible for. And in that, children also want to be contributors. They want to be helpers often. So giving them a role or a job within the care of their parent is actually appropriate. Mm-hmm. What if they're the ones who paint the toenails? What if they're the ones who, help fluff the pillows? Giving them an active role so that they feel like they're contributing to their parent care can be a really important piece of it as well.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like, every child, because we could go through, the different ages and stages, but what's most important is that we are addressing attachment and bonding and really looking at how are we and who are we putting into their lives to be able to create more trusting adults for them. Because when one parent is out of the equation, that child needs to identify other people who are at different phases and stages of grieving their loved one. So it might be a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a person at the church, but there needs to be a community of support for that child, because often they can't always go to the surviving parent in the beginning because they often feel like they might be bringing on even some more grief to that parent. So during this time of being able to identify other people in your child's life to be able to pour into them, spend time with them. Families often, their security changes for a child because maybe their mom is their, care provider, and then the child becomes more of the care provider for the parent. That often happens at end of life, but certainly the more support they have, the more adults in their life that they have to go to is going to be really beneficial. I think we remember that they are children and they are going to express themselves the way that they know how. Sometimes it's verbal. Sometimes they'll just let you know exactly how they feel. Other times it's behavior, and you're going to see some big behavior changes and transitions. That's completely normal. We would expect that. You might see your teenager taking more risky behaviors. That's normal too. These are just different responses of dealing with big transitions and changes in life. But I think what's most important is that your child feels comfortable coming to you with questions,
yes,
coming to you to talk about what's going on. So being open to dialogue about difficult things is very important.
Yeah. And I think you touched on like what I heard, like if you're just going to have that one time, like Michelle said, right, then that is harder to create that kind of environment of you can come to me anytime if we have it, if it's like a one type of a thing. So the repeatedness of having, you might feel like you're saying the same thing over and over and over again, but kids sometimes need to hear, as adults, I need to hear things multiple times to remember. So I think that, that's important to remember is having that openness to continually be having these conversations.
And when your child shares an emotion or a feeling, it's so important to validate that emotion and feeling, because as parents, sometimes we're not trying to diminish it, but we're trying to maybe redirect it. Like, oh, don't worry, it's going to be okay. Change that dialogue. Let them know it's okay to worry, that everyone is worried, that people are scared and afraid, people are sad. Those are all emotions that we want to validate so that the child knows that it's okay to feel that way, that this is a normal part of the process.
Yeah.
And I'll even add, go ahead.
No, you, Michael.
I was just going to say, that we see kids are smarter than we think they are, and they're observant, and they often have less baggage than we do. Like and sometimes they're processing things in a much more sort of new and real way. But I see plenty of kids that actually the parents think that they don't know anything or that they don't know what's going on. And they're worried that, if I bring it up now, I'm going to make him sad or I'm going to make him upset because he's not upset right now. And over, what I see is that those kids, many of those kids, are actually protecting their parents. They can sense the adults around them acting weird, that things aren't normal, right? It's not normal for dad to be in a hospital over and over and over again. Other dads aren't doing that. And yet there's sort of this collusion to not talk about it because we're all protecting each other. And so I love that sort of idea that Sarah's talking about of just creating space to let them process that. Like, it may be verbal, it may be drawing pictures, it may be, in play, it may be at church. There's places where it'll play out, but to give space for that. And sometimes, though, we have to actually sort of draw it out a little bit, especially for the ones that are quiet and not showing behaviors and not saying it, because many times they know more than we think they do.
I just have a story of one of the patients I was with who was a mother of a breast cancer mother who was dying, and she had 4 kids. And I think all of us in this field, we learn so much from our patients because, again, there are beautiful deaths. There really are. And they're really, we all are going to face death, and we can do it with grace and dignity, or we can go kicking and screaming, but it still happens. And it's always sad when it happens, no matter how old or young we are. But anyway, I had this story of this patient, and she had 4 kids, and so they were all under 18, and she was dying, and it was about September when I first met with her, and she was so amazing, and I still have chills when I think of her, the legacy she left with me, and I don't even remember her name, but what she said is, and I said, how are your kids? What are you, and she began to tell me, the kids know I'm not going to be here this Christmas. And I've told them how sorry I am that I won't be here this Christmas. And I just thought that was so beautiful. The fact that, because as you all probably are learning, there's different stages where people are going to be angry and mad and sad. But for, the kids to hear that, remember that mom wanted to be here or dad wanted to be here. And it seems obvious to us, but I think those are such good things to say for the kids to remember, that you wished you were there. And you will be there in spirit, of course, but, and you can have whatever you want to add to that. But I just thought that was a beautiful thing.
Acknowledging and saying the hard thing, that kind of goes back to even what Michael was saying in the beginning of words do matter. And the words that we choose to say do matter. Yeah. So good. I
think there's a lot of phrases that adults often use when we're talking about death, and it has to do with, so-and-so is going to be sleeping forever, or, they're playing with the angels and these figurative type language, but children are so concrete and literal that we have to use language that's concrete and literal when we're speaking to them.
Yeah.
I think another thing is that to recognize that, usually as I see kids, besides their parents, their greatest resource is their peers, and doing this is challenging enough in normal times, and now we're faced with this COVID time, and how does that even further complicate the fact that they're not seeing their friends on a regular basis, in person. Hopefully, I think if there's one benefit of this time, we've all become more electronically savvy, and so that has decreased our ages by maybe about 10 to 15 years. So so we're more able to identify that. But the thing is to look at their resources, who can help them, and yes, we as parents, we as relatives, and that kind of thing. But we need to also recognize that maybe their first resource might not be might not be their parent. It might be their aunt or uncle, or somebody else, and that may be their go-to, and that's okay.
Yeah. This is so good. I just kind of want to take us and turn us just a little bit to what might be on some families' minds this morning of, okay, we've talked about, what hospice is. We've talked about what it's not. We've talked about the beauty in it. We've talked about the longevity that it can have. And we've talked about how to prepare our kids. But what happens when my person actually does die at home? Or what happens when I die? What will my people experience? Maybe you guys can kind of just talk about that moment. Michael, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, and this is an interesting question, right? Because if we went back 100 years, we wouldn't necessarily be asking this question, because death was so much a part of life. And many of us have never had someone die in our home. But if we went back 100 years, that was pretty common. And so just our familiarity with death as a culture, we've really lost that, right? And so now this is this unknown and scary thing. I think, and Sarah will be able to speak to this more, I think particularly when we think about our kids tend to be quite curious and sort of ask good questions, and sometimes ask weird questions and really gross questions and hard questions, but honest questions. And,
Yep.
And if we can role model to them how that it is okay, this is something that I see a lot in the hospital, and the ability to show families to role model that they can touch their loved one after they've gone. So when I go and I pronounce someone as dead, and I am listening and I'm doing that process and I'm holding their hand, and I can invite a family to come up to the bed with me. And for many of us, actually feeling their loved one and seeing the distinction of seeing what was once alive and is now gone is actually a really important thing to feel and to see. So I think that we can help to normalize that. There's the practical piece that hospice helps with, of who gets called and how, who comes and gets the body and things like that. And hospice is incredibly helpful in just thinking that through. Again, it's one of those 24/7, this is the number to call kind of thing, if they're not already there. But I think this sort of preparing and then what to do during that time, that we can really role model how to say goodbye to that physical shell.
And so how the process works, like Michael just started, is, and what I like to tell families ahead of time is, it is important, if you can talk about it, is to have your funeral arrangements ahead of time, because you don't want to be worrying, because that's what they're going to ask when somebody dies in the home. They're going to say, where's the body going? And that's not a time where you want to be making phone calls and asking how much it costs. You want to already have that done ahead of time. And
Right.
Hospice can help you make those calls or give you names ahead of time. So that's something you want to have done ahead of time, if at all possible. So what does happen is, a lot of times, again, the dying process can last anywhere. It can be overnight. You wake up and they've stopped breathing, or it can go on for days and days. It can take a long time for somebody to die. And that's when usually hospice is in place. But if it's not, you make the call, and it's usually pretty obvious the person isn't breathing and they feel different. They're going to feel cool to the touch. And then a nurse or a doctor comes out and pronounces, and they make the phone calls. They're going to call the medical examiner, who usually, releases the body. And then that's when they're going to say, who do we call to pick up the body? And it's a peaceful thing. you can say, do you want a few hours? And it usually takes a few hours, honestly, that the body's in the home. And that's where it is okay. If the children want to go and touch the body, it is okay. And if the children don't want to, that's okay too. But it's a peaceful thing. There's no emergency. There does not need to call the ambulance if you have hospice in place. There's no sirens and lights, but a hearse will come pick up the body.
Yeah, Sarah, can you talk us through the importance of giving children a choice in that moment and what you would recommend?
Yeah. Because we don't always know the timing of when a death is going to happen. Having a conversation ahead of time is often good. And again, with the different ages of your child and knowing how your child experiences things, they might choose to be at home. They might choose to be in the room where their loved one is, or they might choose to be in their own room. But giving choices around that is very important. We don't ever want a child to feel like they were removed from that experience. We want them to make that choice if they're at an age where they can do that. I think what's really important is to talk about what they experience in terms of their own senses, what they're going to see, what it will feel like, what they might smell, what's normal for a human body to do at the end of life, what color you might see the skin start to turn, and hospice workers can really help give those details to children so that they know it's normal. It's normal for, even in the dying process, it's normal for a body to get very puffy. It's normal for your parent to stop peeing. It's normal for their hands to maybe be cold to the touch. It's normal for their mouth to maybe be open. So there are certain things that we want children to know that this is what we expect. And it's okay to look like this when your body's starting to shut down. So I think having, again, the open dialogue, the talking about what they will experience in terms of their own senses. Yeah. And then also letting them know that, you usually hold mom's hand, during dinner. You can still do that even though her body is not breathing. Her heart has stopped and her lungs have stopped and now she's dead, but you can still touch her. She'll just feel different. So there's ways to prepare them in that moment or prepare them ahead of time. Sometimes children like to have something, either a comfort object or a transitional item that they want to go with their loved one to the funeral home. And funeral homes have different stipulations for that. But oftentimes if a child wants to draw a picture to go along with the body or send a stuffed animal or have a choice in what blanket will be wrapped around their parent, that might be something that helps them also in giving them a choice around that end of life.
Yeah, that is so good. And that goes back to being an active participant in it and not just a passive one. And I think we know that as adults that we like, that control, but giving kiddos a way to kind of have a control and to be a part of the process is what it sounds like is just a very extremely helpful in the entire process. So thank you for those things. John, anything that you would like to add about just?
Well, thinking about the number of times that I have been present with families when, when the patient takes their last breath, and or coming to visit the family, sometimes minutes to hours after it's happened, or the situation where the family has called the hospice team and said, we think that he or she is imminent and we really want you to come and help the family. And on the drive over, right, the patient passes and you arrive and there is that final moment. I think however we do it, and one of the things that is a benefit for hospice is that as I know people, as I know our nurses and our aides and the doctors and everybody on the team, we are here, we are compassionate to the family and to help them get through this momentous moment in the entire family, and the compassion that is shown and the support that is given, that really becomes the moment that the family will remember. How do we facilitate the kids saying their final goodbyes? Is there an opportunity, family, to gather around and offer final prayers for the family and the soul of the patient in dignity, and really, that's one of the most important things is that hospice is here to make sure that people die with dignity and they don't die alone. Mm-hmm. And to do our best as humanly possible to alleviate the suffering, both of the patient and to help the family deal with their grieving and their suffering afterwards. As I say, I couldn't even imagine, 100 years ago not having that. Mm. And what do I do now? They're going through this. What do I do? What do I do? Mm. And to have that support and sometimes it is to let them go. Mm. And we get to be the people to help them to understand that love lasts forever, and that though your loved one has gone, they will always remain alive in your heart because they have created that space in your heart, and they will be with you forever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. I'm thinking there's just interesting words that kind of have come up this entire talk. Joy and laughter and hope and peace and things that you wouldn't normally attribute to hospice, yet all of you have spoken them, which is a great encouragement to my heart. And I know it's a great encouragement to our families at home. So as we kind of conclude our time this morning, I'm just wondering if there's any other last, just words that come to mind that you think of when you think of hospice, just to encourage, or maybe they're just short phrases or something, but to the family, at sitting in their living room thinking okay, maybe they've taken a few deep breaths, this maybe isn't as terrible as I was thinking it, was going to be, but I'm still scared, or this is still hard, or I still don't like that word. Any just last words of encouragement or thoughts to leave us with today?
Hospice is how you want to live. It's how you want to live with advanced disease. Not everyone's going to choose hospice, and I'm okay with that. Our dear friends didn't choose hospice, and that's okay. Some people will choose to go to the hospital in and out every day of their life until the day of their death, and that's okay. But if some other people, I think for myself, there is a point where medicine might cause more harm than it's helping you. And so if you're considering being at that point, hospice is going to be, I'm choosing to be at home. I'm tired of going to the doctor's offices. I just want to focus on being at home. So hospice is not giving up. It's saying, this is how I want to live with my advanced disease.
Right.
So good.
Yeah, I think I would add that, nothing puts life quite in perspective like death, right? When we're sort of thinking about these things, suddenly to think about what really does matter most, and our families and faith and communities and like the stuff that, right, really the stuff that we should be thinking about all along, that none of us are really promised tomorrow. There's a great gift in that. To sort of pause. And I mean, just all of us, the folks that are here today, right, are starting to ask that question. And that just sort of awareness, there's such great potential in that to live abundantly, right? That it's more than just a measure of days. It's abundant. It's to have life and to have it to the full.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Awesome.
I just want to say thank you to you, Heidi, and also to the other panelists, but especially to our families. It's very courageous and brave to enter into conversations that tend to be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And you've done it. You've listened to us talk about this for an hour, and we, I've given you some things to think about, but I trust you're going to do what's best for your family.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that what you heard today will encourage you, and also really maybe encourage you to start a list of things, of experiences you'd like to have together as a family. Perhaps start having more conversations around death, dying, and grief, and bereavement with your children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would absolutely ditto everything, everything that was said. And for those families that are facing this decision, do start a conversation with your local hospice company. The hospice resources that you have available around you, and that will help you make a decision. That will help either set your mind at ease or decide that you want to take a different path. Mm-hmm. And again, this is your journey, and as I've experienced hospice, we're here to be a resource and help to you. Mm. And please know that you are in our prayers all the time, every single day. I every single day I'm praying for those who are under hospice care and who are going through bereavement, and you are being upheld in prayers. All kinds of different faith communities are lifting you up in prayer all the time. And so, I just would encourage you, talk to your local hospice company, find the one that fits your needs, your desires, your wishes. And you really are in charge, and we're here to serve you.
So great. Well, as we kind of conclude our time together, I would echo definitely what Sarah said. Thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you for doing a hard thing and for tuning in to a conversation that, maybe is not super easy, but you've heard a lot of really positive encouragement and so many beautiful things that come out of this hard thing. And so we're grateful for you. We love you guys so much. We say that all the time, and you know that we mean it. We do. We love you. We would love to pray for you. We would love to talk to you. All of our panelists here, we have their emails, and we hadn't talked about this, but I'm just going to say, like, they might, I can even like include them in the chat maybe, but I just want you guys to know that they have so graciously come on here and been able to be such a resource. And so maybe I'll include their emails if they, just for clarifying questions about some things. But yeah, so now we're going to be all done with this, and we will see you at our next time slot. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.